My name is Selene Hartley. I'm 34 years old and I work as a pediatric nurse in Houston, Texas. I used to believe that family stood by you when the sky fell, that when the worst happened, the people you grew up with would circle around you like a wall, protecting what was left of you. I clung to that belief like it was gospel, until the day I had to bury my husband and my own family chose a birthday party instead of standing beside me. Jason was my husband, my best friend, my peace. He wasn't loud or flashy, but he had a way of making every room feel calm. We were married for 7 years. We didn't have children yet. We were starting the adoption process, but we had a full life, one we built from scratch. That life ended in one phone call, a highway accident, a drunk driver. One moment I was texting Jason about dinner, the next I was in a hospital staring at his wedding ring in a plastic bag. I planned the funeral alone. The only available date at the church and cemetery was March 26th. I barely slept, barely breathed. When I told my mother the date, there was this pause. Then she said, "But that's Michelle's birthday." My sister. I blinked. "Yes. It's the only day that works." She sighed. "I just don't want her day ruined. She's been planning a trip with her friends for months." I froze. "Mum, Jason is gone. I'm burying my husband, your son-in-law." Her voice stayed even. "You know how Michelle gets. Maybe you could move it a few days." That was the moment something cracked in me. My husband had died, and my family was talking about cake and beach selfies. It didn't come. Not my mother, not my father, not Michelle. While I stood at Jason's grave in a wind-beaten black dress, reading the last letter I'd ever write to the man I loved, my sister posted a boomerang on Instagram from a rooftop bar. 30, flirty and thriving, birthday escape. Not a call, not a single condolence. It wasn't just grief I felt, it was betrayal. It wrapped around me tighter than any winter wind. I cried alone that night, in the house Jason built with his own 2 hands. The same house my parents helped us paint, and I promised myself I was done begging people to show up for me. But I didn't know then that just 3 weeks later, my late grandfather's will would be unsealed, and in that moment, sitting across from the very people who had left me to grieve in silence, everything would change. 3 weeks after Jason's funeral, I found myself sitting stiffly in the mahogany-panelled office of my grandfather's longtime attorney, Bernard Kessler. The room smelled like old paper and cigar smoke. Exactly the kind of place where secrets are kept in drawers and fortunes are carved with pens instead of shovels. My mother sat across from me, legs crossed, flipping through her phone like she was waiting for brunch. Michelle, of course, wore white, always the centre of attention, still glowing from her birthday trip to Puerto Vallarta, tanned and smiling like nothing in the world had happened. Neither had spoken to me since the funeral, not even a, "How are you holding up?" But today they had to look me in the eye. Because this wasn't just a family gathering. It was a reading of Grandfather Hartley's final will and testament. The man who built our family name on land, cattle, and legacy. A man who valued honour, tradition, and consequences. Bernard cleared his throat and tapped the envelope in front of him. This version of the will was written and signed 9 months ago, in full sound mind. There is a letter attached, from Mr. Hartley himself. My stomach tightened. My grandfather wasn't the kind of man who left things to chance. If he added a letter, it meant he knew things were already broken in this family. He began reading aloud. "To my children and grandchildren, I have lived long enough to watch you grow. I've watched pride replace humility, celebration replace character. I know I may not be around when the real storms hit, so I've made choices to preserve the values this family once stood for." Everyone straightened. My mother shifted uncomfortably. Michelle stopped chewing her gum. Then Bernard spoke again. "To Selene Hartley, my granddaughter, I leave the following: my entire residential estate in Magnolia Hill, the surrounding 12 acres of land, the 1956 Chevy truck, and the family trust account totaling $2,400,000, 0 cents. The room went dead silent. I didn't move. My ears were ringing. The family estate, the land, the trust. I'd expected maybe a keepsake, a letter, a quiet nod to the bond we shared when I used to bring him baked scones every Sunday after Jason and I moved closer. But this was everything. My mother's face went red. Michelle made a choking sound. "What?" she snapped. "That has to be a mistake. Grandpa promised me the house. He told me I'd raise my kids there." She turned to Bernard like he was a broken toy. "Read it again." I did, word for word. Then he continued. "To Michelle Hartley, I leave the beach condo in Galveston. I hope you'll use it to grow into the woman I once saw glimpses of. No cash, no land, no legacy." Michelle sat back, mouth open, stunned. My mother finally spoke, her voice cold, clipped. "Selena is grieving. She doesn't need responsibility right now. She's not thinking clearly, this kind of gift, this kind of burden. She's in no condition to manage an estate. My father must have made a mistake, or been confused or manipulated." Bernard raised a hand. "He wasn't confused, Margaret. In fact, he left a video." He turned his monitor, clicked a file, and up came a recording. My grandfather, frail, seated in a sunlit room, but eyes sharp and voice strong, looked straight into the camera. "If you're watching this, I'm gone. But don't be shocked. You all know I wasn't fond of liars or cowards. Selene, you were the only one who visited me without an agenda. You brought me tea, sat with me, listened. When Jason died, I saw how you stood alone, and how no one, not even your own mother, showed up. That told me all I needed to know." My eyes burned. He continued. "Michelle, I've watched you expect everything and earn nothing. Margaret, I loved you once as a daughter, but love requires more than appearances. I'm leaving my legacy to the one who still lives by the principles I raised you all with. If you don't like it, you can take it up with the man upstairs." The screen went black. Michelle stood up so fast her chair screeched. "This isn't over. I'll contest it." My mother didn't say a word. She just gathered her purse and walked out, heels clicking like gunshots. But me, I sat there, frozen, flooded with emotion, because in one moment, everything changed. And what they didn't know was, my grandfather left more than money behind. He left instructions. I stayed behind after everyone left the law office. I wasn't ready to face the silence outside. Bernard closed his leather binder and gave me a look I couldn't quite read, something between respect and pity. "There's something else your grandfather left," he said, walking over to the file cabinet in the corner. He pulled out a locked wooden box, small and heavy, like something out of an old war movie. He said only you could open this, gave specific instructions, no one else is to touch it, not even me. He handed me a key wrapped in a worn cloth. "Selene, whatever's inside, I suggest you read it somewhere quiet. And alone." I nodded, heart pounding. I drove back to my late grandfather's estate, the estate that now, legally, belonged to me. The house was old but beautiful, with creaking floors, towering oaks, and a front porch that had seen 1,000 sunsets. I used to sit on that porch with him as a little girl while he told stories about how he built this land from nothing after the war. I always thought they were just tales. Turns out, this land held more truth than any of us ever knew. I placed the box on his old desk in the study. I took a deep breath and turned the key. Inside was a stack of letters, a folded deed, and a black and white photo of a much younger grandfather Hartley, standing next to a man I didn't recognize, grinning, shovels in hand, dirt piled behind them. But what caught my attention was the envelope marked, "For Selene, when they turn their backs on you." I opened it slowly. His handwriting was shaky, but every word struck like a map. "Selene, if you're reading this, then everything went the way I feared it might. Your mother and sister care more about image than substance. I saw it for years. I hoped they'd change, but people don't often grow out of selfishness unless they're forced to. This house, this land, is not just a piece of property. It's proof of sacrifice, of resilience, and of secrets I've buried deeper than the roots of that magnolia tree outside. You're the only one I trust with what comes next. I blinked hard, my fingers trembling as I flipped to the next page. He went on. Reiki? There's an old storm shelter under the barn. You'll find the hatch hidden beneath the hay bales. You'll need the other key. Taped under the desk drawer. What's down there will explain why I had to make the choices I did, and why this family was never quite what it seemed. My heart dropped. Was this about money? Hidden assets? Something darker? My grandfather had always been protective of this land, but I thought it was just stubborn pride. Now, I wasn't so sure. I found the key exactly where he said it would be. I pulled on a jacket and walked across the backyard toward the barn, heart pounding with every step. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows, and the creak of the barn door was the only sound in the wind. I pushed aside the hay, revealing a rusted iron latch buried in dust and cobwebs. I unlocked it, and the hatch groaned open like a secret exhaling. A narrow staircase led down into darkness. I hesitated, then stepped inside, clutching a flashlight. The air was thick, musty, old. But as I reached the bottom, I froze. There were file cabinets, boxes labelled with years, a workbench, and mounted on the wall, photos, dozens of them, of people I didn't recognise. Some smiling, some with red X's drawn over their faces. And in the centre of the room, a locked safe. I didn't know it yet, but my grandfather's decision to give me the estate had nothing to do with inheritance. He was passing down something else entirely, something my family would have killed to hide. The safe was old, cold steel with a mechanical dial that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. I stared at it, heart racing, wondering if this was where my grandfather kept the real reason for his final decision. I searched the surrounding boxes and drawers, flipping through old maps, newspaper clippings, even faded receipts from decades ago. Then, tucked inside a manila envelope taped to the underside of a drawer, I found it. A combination scribbled in pencil on the back of an old photo of my grandfather and the same mysterious man from the earlier photo, this time shaking hands in front of a law office. I turned the dial slowly. The lock clicked. Inside was a thick stack of documents, a leather journal, and a faded envelope labelled confidential to be used if they ever turn on her. The word her sent a chill up my spine. He knew this day would come. He knew they'd betray me. I lifted out the journal first. Its pages were lined with my grandfather's meticulous handwriting. Notes, observations, records of conversations going back nearly 30 years, and on nearly every page, my mother's name. Margaret Hartley. I sat down on the workbench, flashlight perched on a hook, and began reading. My grandfather had been keeping tabs on my mother for years. It started with small things. Margaret withdrew $10,000, 0 cents from joint family account without notice. Margaret pressured board to sell Eastfield to developer, against my wishes. But over time the entries darkened. Margaret forged my signature on land transfer proposal, Michelle Cart. Boasting that house would be hers soon, Margaret promised it, and, finally, spoke with lawyer, changing will. They are circling like vultures. I covered my mouth in shock. This wasn't just selfishness or entitlement. This was calculated. My own mother had been trying to covertly sell off parts of the family estate using my grandfather's name, expecting that she'd eventually inherit it all and quietly cover her tracks. And Michelle? She was in on it too, banking on a future she thought was guaranteed. But then came the real punch. Inside the confidential envelope were 2 notarized affidavits. The first was from a retired accountant, confirming that Margaret had funneled HOA funds from the Magnolia Hill community into a private development account registered under an alias. The second was from a lawyer, testifying that Margaret had tried to have my grandfather declared mentally unfit just a year prior to his death, so she could legally seize control of his estate. She tried to erase him before he even died. I couldn't breathe. All those years I thought my family's coldness was just emotional distance. It was strategy. While I was tending to my grandfather out of love, they were plotting to rip the legacy out from under both of us. And when Jason died, they saw it as an opportunity to isolate me, label me fragile, and reclaim what they thought was rightfully theirs. But my grandfather saw it all coming. He didn't just leave me the estate to honour me. He left it to protect me. I put the journal and documents in a duffel bag, locked the safe again, and climbed back out of the shelter with shaking legs. Night had fallen, but I barely noticed the darkness. My mind was already racing through everything: the funeral, the will, the smugness on Michelle's face, the quiet rage in my mother's eyes. They had no idea I had evidence. No clue their schemes were documented, signed, and ready to bury them legally. They wanted war? They were about to find out. I'd inherited more than land. I'd inherited leverage. By morning, I had barely slept. I sat at the kitchen table of the estate, surrounded by paper, evidence, letters, photocopies, and that journal that felt heavier than any weapon I'd ever held. It wasn't just personal now, it was criminal. My own mother had committed fraud, and my sister was knee-deep in it with her. I could have stormed over to their homes and demanded answers. I could have screamed, cried, thrown it all on the floor and asked how they slept at night, but I didn't. Because I had something they never expected: patience. Instead, I called the one person I knew would know what to do: Jason's cousin, Leland, a corporate attorney who specialized in estate litigation. He picked up on the first ring. "Selene," he said, his voice warm and steady, "I saw what your family did at the funeral. I've been waiting for this call." I told him everything, from the storm shelter to the files to the video from the will reading. When I was done, there was a pause on the line. Then, calmly, "We're going to destroy them, legally." We began building a quiet but airtight case. Leland drafted a legal motion to freeze all current transactions linked to the estate, including any holdings Margaret and Michelle had tried to tie into family properties. He traced shell companies, we pulled bank records, we found 3 fraudulent land surveys filed under a subcontractor Michelle once dated. My mother wasn't just shady, she was methodical, but she had left paper trails, and we were following every single one. And then I made a move that changed everything. I invited them both to the estate. I told them I wanted to talk things out, that I didn't want lawyers involved, that maybe there was a way we could all benefit from grandfather's will. Michelle responded immediately. "I knew you'd come to your senses," she said, as if we were negotiating a shopping list. My mother was more cautious. "We'll hear you out," she replied, but I could feel the suspicion in her voice. Perfect. They arrived dressed like they were attending a brunch fundraiser. Heels, makeup, condescension. Michelle walked in like she owned the place. "So, ready to sign over the land, or are we still pretending you know how to run an estate?" My mother sat in the chair my grandfather used to fall asleep in and crossed her arms. "Let's get to it, Selene. We have other matters to attend to." I nodded and placed a folder on the table. "I just want to show you what I found." Michelle rolled her eyes, flipping it open, and froze. Inside were copies of the affidavits, the forged transfer papers, the lawyer's statement about the failed mental incompetency filing. My mother reached for them, but I slapped my hand down on the folder. I made 6 copies. One's already with the state attorney's office, another with my lawyer, so don't bother grabbing them. The room fell cold. Michelle's face turned red, her voice rising. "You're bluffing. This is all fake. He hated paperwork. Everyone knows that." I leaned forward. You forged property documents. You used HOA money to fund a private development scam. And Mum," I turned to her, my voice low and clear, "you tried to get your father declared mentally unstable, to take control of everything he built. He knew. He left receipts. And now, so do I." My mother said nothing. Not a word. Her hands trembled, barely noticeable, but I saw it. For the first time in my life, she was scared of me. I stood up. "You don't need to worry about the estate anymore. In a few days you'll be worried about something else. Your legal defense." They didn't slam the door when they left. They walked out in silence. But me? I locked it behind them, turned toward the hallway, and for the first time since Jason died, I exhaled. It didn't take long before the subpoenas landed on their doorsteps. Leland filed everything by the book, quietly but aggressively. We weren't just going after Margaret and Michelle in civil court. We were bringing criminal fraud allegations to light. The land transfers, the embezzled HOA funds, the falsified surveys. It was all airtight, and thanks to my grandfather's meticulous records, there was no wiggle room for them to hide behind denial or confusion. At first, they tried to posture. Michelle posted vague Instagram stories. "Family will betray you faster than strangers. Be careful who you trust." My mother, on the other hand, started calling extended family members, spinning the story in hushed tones. "Selene's not well," she told my Aunt Grace. "She's grieving, she's confused, and now she's lashing out." But I expected that. That's exactly why I backed everything with fact. I didn't need anyone to believe me. I just needed the judge to. The court date was set for early Tuesday morning. I remember standing in front of the mirror that day, buttoning the blazer I hadn't worn since Jason's funeral. For the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't dressing to mourn. I was dressing to fight. I walked into that courtroom alone. But I wasn't alone, not really. I had every record, every affidavit, every photo and email printed, labelled and organised. My grandfather's journal sat inside my bag, tucked beneath my statement. Michelle tried to act unbothered in her designer suit, but her face was pale. Margaret barely looked at me. Her lawyer did most of the talking, spinning a weak narrative that this was a misunderstanding rooted in old family tensions. But then Leland stood up and peeled them apart. He played video clips from the will reading, presented the signatures and financial statements, read aloud the sworn testimony from their former contractor, who admitted he'd been paid in cash to submit altered survey records under Michelle's direction. Then it was my turn. I stood up slowly, hands calm, voice steady. My grandfather left me more than a house and a bank account. He left me the truth. And with it, the responsibility to protect everything he built, his land, his name, and his legacy. I buried my husband without them. I stood at a funeral alone, and still, I didn't retaliate. I only opened the shelter because I had no one left to lean on, and what I found wasn't a weapon, it was protection. There was a stillness in the courtroom as I stepped down. Margaret's face didn't twitch. But Michelle, she broke. Tears filled her eyes. She whispered something to her lawyer. He shook his head. The judge asked if the defendants had anything further to add. They didn't. The ruling was swift. The judge issued a temporary restraining order barring them from coming near the estate, froze Michelle's development accounts for investigation, and opened a formal inquiry into Margaret's financial conduct as HOA board treasurer. But the most powerful blow came after. The judge made it public. A press release summarised the outcome. Hartley estate protected from internal fraud. Evidence supports elder abuse and misuse of authority by immediate family. The town saw it. So did our family. The silence that came after was deafening and freeing, because what they had tried to take with manipulation and pressure, I had protected with truth and courage. But I wasn't done yet. There was still one letter from my grandfather I hadn't opened. The one labelled, "Read only when it's over." I waited a week after the court ruling to open the last letter. Something about it felt sacred, like if I opened it too soon I'd miss something he meant for me to understand only when I'd earned it. But now that it was over, now that Margaret and Michelle were barred from the estate and under investigation, now that the house finally felt like mine, I knew I was ready. I sat on the porch in Grandfather's old rocking chair, the letter trembling in my hands. The envelope was thick and yellowed, sealed with a single piece of red wax, his old-school way of saying, "This one matters." I cracked the seal and unfolded the note. "If you're reading this, it means you stood firm. You made it through the storm, and you did it with your head high. I'm proud of you, but I'm also sorry. There are things I never told you, things I never told anyone. This family didn't break itself overnight. It started long before you were born, and I was part of the problem." My breath caught. "Your mother didn't become cold overnight. When she was younger, I pushed her too hard. I made her believe that love had to be earned. I praised her for winning, not for being kind. I ignored her when she needed softness, and I rewarded her when she outshined others. And Michelle, she grew up watching that cycle, trying to outdo her mother. I planted the seeds of the very greed you just fought off." I read it twice, heart pounding. "I left you the estate, not just because you deserved it, but because you're the only one I didn't damage. The only one who saw people, not power. But Selene, this land still has shadows. People are going to come for it, developers, lawyers, old friends who suddenly remember your name. You must protect it, not just because it's yours, but because it tells the truth about all of us. Keep the journal, keep the files. One day you may need them again." He signed it simply. "Your grandfather." I sat there for a long time. I had fought so hard to protect his name, and now I realized he had been protecting me from his own mistakes all along. The legacy wasn't clean. It was messy, complicated, and real. But it was mine now, not because I was better, but because I was willing to face the truth, while everyone else kept pretending. That night, I locked the shelter again, this time not out of fear, but respect. I scanned the property with new eyes, not as a broken woman clinging to what was left, but as the guardian of what came next. But just as I turned to go inside, my phone buzzed. An email. Subject line, Hartley Land Title Dispute, claim filed. My stomach dropped. Someone else was trying to take what I'd fought for. And this time, they weren't family. The email came from a corporate law firm I'd never heard of, Dawson and Price, LLP, but the name at the bottom made my blood run cold. Derek Marshall. He was one of the largest real estate developers in Texas. He'd been circling Magnolia Hill for years, trying to buy up nearby farms and old estates to build high-end luxury homes. My grandfather always called him the buzzard in a suit. I clicked the PDF attached to the email and saw the words, "Formal challenge to property title. Parcel 12B. I couldn't believe it. I had just won. I had fought off my mother and sister, buried the lies, exposed the fraud, and now this. A corporate stranger with lawyers and millions of dollars was challenging my right to own the land my grandfather built with his bare hands. But when I read further, my skin prickled. They weren't claiming I forged anything. No, they were going deeper. Based on recently discovered records, the claim read, Mr. Hartley may have failed to properly file updates to the land deed in the late 1990s, creating ambiguity regarding ownership boundaries shared with Marshall Holdings. It was technical, buried in legal jargon, but it meant one thing. They were trying to take part of the estate based on a 30-year-old technicality. I called Leland immediately. "They're testing you," he said. "They know you've just gone through a fight, and they think you're tired. Developers like this prey on distraction. If we don't shut this down fast, it'll open the door for a dozen more claims." I felt the fire again. Tired. Sure, but not done. We dug back into the storm shelter. Every map, every survey, every dusty record. And there it was. A hand-drawn boundary revision dated 1998, signed by my grandfather and a neighbouring farmer. It had never been digitised. It was stored only in the shelter. Proof that grandfather had protected the land the right way, even if he never filed the formal update at the county clerk's office. But that alone wouldn't hold up in court. So we did something bold. We went public. I wrote a detailed op-ed in the local paper. Why I fought my own family to protect the Hartley legacy. In it, I exposed the title challenge. I named Derek Marshall. I attached the old survey and told the story of how my grandfather had outlived every scheme, family or corporate that tried to break him down. It caught fire. Residents of Magnolia Hill rallied behind me. Local farmers, former neighbours, even people I didn't know, shared the story online with messages like, "This land is history, not a dollar sign. Developers go home." And the pressure worked. 2 weeks later, Dawson and Price LRP formally withdrew the title dispute. No apology, no explanation, just silence. And this time it felt final. I stood on the estate that night and watched the wind move through the tall grass. I thought of Jason, of my grandfather, of everything I had lost and everything I had uncovered. This wasn't just about property. It never had been. It was about worth. Not what you can buy, not what you can build over, but what you stand for when everyone else walks away. My family chose a birthday party over my grief. But grief forged me into a protector. And when they came for the land, with lies, secrets and lawsuits, I buried every single one of them with the truth. The end.